Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important updates that took place during the previous night of the local time. And first we're going to talk and continue discussion about Avdiivka direction. We have a lot of updates, and the most important updates are coming from the southern part of the theater. The Russians, according to information we have, managed to answer Severna yesterday. Some sources reported that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish control over the entire village, but later we got more details about the situation. Currently this situation in the village is covered with the fog of war. First of all, some Russian sources reported that the Russians conducted an offensive operation from Avdiivka, from the 9th quarter to the east, like along this line, but some pro-Russian sources reported that the Russians launched an offensive operation from the southern part. So for now it's very difficult to understand where exactly and how exactly the Russians were attacking, but the only thing we know for sure that currently the Russians control just over 50 or even less percent of the village, maybe half or something like this. But anyway, I believe that attack was conducted from two directions, and as a result of the first wave, the Russians managed to establish control over the settlements and the buildings that located, let's say, on the top of the water barrier. So if you take a look at this map, you're going to see that there is a water barrier like this one, and the Russians, of course, didn't have time to cross the area, so they were forced to conduct an offensive from two directions. And the second attack took place from the southern part, from this area, and as a result of that attack, the Russians very likely established control over some building in the eastern part of the village, or at least this territory is in the gray zone. So for now we can tell for sure that very likely that this part of Severna is in the gray zone. The rest part, let's say the northwestern part, this one is under Ukraine control or either in the gray zone. Anyways, I understand the Ukrainians still control the farms in the western part, this one with one purpose: to secure and to create a safe road for evacuation of Ukrainian soldiers who are currently located along the tree lines to the south of Tonenka or to the north of Vadiana. So I'm trying to say that if the Ukrainians left their positions in Severna, this can be a very big risk for the Ukrainian soldiers who are currently located in this part of the foothold, so in this area. So for now they need to secure these soldiers, to give them time, to give them let's say secure roads for evacuation, and only after that the Ukrainians have possibilities to abandon their positions and move further to Tonenka. And there is another defense belt, this one, a very big one, as you can see. The length of this stronghold of these trenches are around 3 kilometers. So on this line the Ukrainians will try to hold the Russian pressure. So this is the situation in the south, and another interesting details are coming from the northern direction. As we discussed in the previous video, during the previous days the Russians made a lot of attempts to attack the Ukrainian forces and Ukrainian positions in this area. So there is a big Ukrainian defense belt, this one, and there are lots of trenches and fortifications, and the main goal of the Russian armed forces is to connect the supply roads between Stepova and the chemical plant itself. So during the previous days the Russians made a lot of attempts to attack, and today the 3rd Azov Brigade published the video of those attacks. Most of them were repelled by the Ukrainian sources. The Russians, basically according to this video, were defeated, but on this video we can see just attacks of two groups, and very likely the Russians made more attempts and there were more groups. So as I understand, this is a part of propaganda, of course, to show to the Ukrainians about the successful, let's say, operations of Ukraine armed forces, but very likely the Ukrainians were forced to step back from this defense belt as well. So this is the situation in this area, but for now we are going to keep the map as is because we don't have the real confirmations. Furthermore, we got some topographical analysis of the area, and this is Avdiivka direction. And as you can see, the Russians control most of the hills. There are hills from the Ukrainian side in the vicinity, in the area along the railways and Acheretina, but the villages like Severna, Tonenka and Lastichkina, this is Severna, Tonenka, Lastichka, Orlovka, are located in the lowlands. So I don't think that the Russians are going to have a lot of problems to storm and assault these territories. And anyway, sooner or later the Ukrainians will be forced to step back, to withdraw their positions and to fall back. Furthermore, we got very interesting videos and details from this territory. For example, one, let's say this is United Kingdom let's say, volunteer. He's a doc. He is dealing with the wounded soldiers from Avdiivka direction, and he was very upset. He was very upset with the situation, and he was begging and asking Western countries to start supporting Ukraine, because he was saying the Russians are destroying them. They're not just destroying, they're, I don't know, he was using very interesting words. So let's say he was saying something like the Russians are splitting them into molecules or something like this, or atoms. So he was very upset, and he refused to be longer let's say the citizen of United Kingdom, because he's very upset that nobody helps them to fight with Russians. So the situation is difficult and very, very critical. Furthermore, the Russian sources published video from the Western positions from the village by the name of Memrik. On this video, for example, we can see few Russian strikes, probably with Iskander or maybe with Tornado S. This is the first strike. A few seconds later, there's going to be another strike. And as you can see, there were very heavy explosions, and probably the Russians targeted and destroyed some Ukrainian ammo depots or temporary positions of forces. And later, we got some details from other Russian sources. They reported that as a result of those strikes, the attacks took place at 7 p.m. of the local time yesterday, and the Russians reported that as a result of that attack, the Russians destroyed the temporary positions of 22nd Mechanized Brigade, and as a result of those strikes, more than 120 soldiers of Ukrainian forces were killed, and that was the losses. And furthermore, the Ukrainians continue counting the loss. So this is the 120 soldiers is the not final number of that attack. So we see the Russians continue pressure, and I don't think the Ukrainians have chances once again due to the topographical map and the things that the Russians have a lot of benefits. From the other side, we see concentration of Ukrainian fire with FPV drones against the Russian forces in this area, which confirms that there is a Russian activity, and the Ukrainians try to attack the Russians at least with artillery and FPV drones. So like big activity of artillery FPV drones means significant concentration and activity from the Russian side. Now we are moving to Bakhmut-Artyomovsk direction. We have additional reports and updates from this territory as well. The Russians continue offensive operation in direction of Ivanovska, and today additional sources reported and confirmed the Russian progress inside on the southeastern part of the village. And according to information, currently the Russians control something like this, yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of such a progress. But I believe that this is the approximate situation in this area, and the Russians have answered Ivanovska. Of course, there are lots of things in the future, but the most important thing is also topographical analysis, and this is, for example, Ivanovsk, and as you can see, the Russians are attacking from the lowlands in direction of the hills. So obviously the Ukrainians have benefits and have better positions, so that's why the storming process of Ivanovsk and Chasiv Yar are not going to be very easy job, are very easy things. Furthermore, based on the topographical map, as I understand, currently the main goal and the main purpose of the Russians is to establish control over this short tree line, over this small forest. This is the hill, and this is, according to topographical map, the closest hill for the Russians. And if the Russians are able to establish control over this territory, then and to dig in deeper, to create fortifications, temporary positions from this area, they will be able to control everything in Ivanovska, because the differences between, let's say, the positions in Ivanovska and in this forest are more than 40 meters. So the Russians in this area can see every single street, every single building to the south, and even maybe they can see the Klishevka and the fortifications further. So this is important hill, and the Russians are trying to establish control, and the Ukrainians probably will fight for this territory as never before. Furthermore, the Russians continue bombing and attacking Chasiv Yar with artillery. They continue discovering, as you can see, Chasiv Yar is not just the city that located on the hill. As you can see, there are lots of forests, a very big forest around the city. So, and obviously the Ukrainians have significant number of positions, hidden positions there, fortifications, strongholds, and the battle for Chasiv Yar is going to be a very tough thing. And obviously the Russians need to try another solution than to storm this city in front. They need to bypass this city somehow from the south and from the north, because the buildings is not the big problem. The biggest problem is the trees, tree lines, forests around the city. And I'm talking about, for example, this big forest, Stupki Golubkovsky, this big forest to the north of Chasiv Yar. So very difficult, let's say, terrain of the area. And now we are moving to Bilogorovka. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the landfills. On this video, we see additional tossed flamer strikes against the Ukrainian positions. And we were expecting when the Russians are going to launch the ground operation. And Ukrainian sources published today the first videos of, let's say, the latest Russian offensive operation. And as we discussed, the Russians, after established control over the filtration station, took a decision not to attack from filtration station there because yet this foothold is not yet prepared for such operations, and the Russians took a decision to continue advancing from the north along the Seversky Donetsk River with the purpose to enter the hills, to enter the first streets of Bilogorovka from the north. And today we got a lot of videos from the Ukrainian side of how they were bombing and attacking the Russian infantry and the Russian stormtroopers. We will not watch this video due to a significant number of casualties. We haven't received anything for probably 10th day in a row about any progress or updates from Liman direction, from the southern Kupinsk direction, according to the new classification. And the same story, we haven't seen anything about the situation in Sinkovka. So we see that operational pause continues. The Russians are waiting for something. Maybe the Russians want to finish with the celebration of 23rd of February. Today is a man's day in Russia. Maybe after this day the Russians are going to do something. Maybe they're waiting for better weather or something like this. But anyway, operation pause for now is too long, according to my understanding. The Russians are giving the Ukrainians time to prepare the foothold, to bring more reinforcements and reserves, but maybe this is the plan, who knows. Yet we haven't received any more additional updates from Robotina. The clashes continues. The same story about the South Donetsk direction, the same story about Krynki. The only important thing we would like to discuss with you about Krynki, another HIMARS strike was published for the previous 24 hours. If we increase the numbers of updates, let's say for the previous 3 days, we're going to see significant number of HIMARS strikes in this area, significant damage the Ukrainians managed to deal. 3 areas, Chernyanka, Podokalinovka, and Mikhailovka. So at least 3 areas of concentration of, let's say, HIMARS strikes from the Ukrainian side. And obviously the Russians will be forced to move some, let's say, Lancets or maybe a different types of weapon on this direction with the purpose to find, hunt, and destroy the Ukrainian HIMARS systems. And additional interesting reports are coming from Kiev itself. We have a lot of very interesting updates. And today in a row, the second day in a row, we got update about the upcoming demobilization in Ukraine. And I'll remind you that the Ukrainians are planning to make demobilization not just to release the Ukrainian forces, Ukrainian soldiers. Obviously, these guys who will be demobilized from line of combat contact, they are not able to find any other job because they are military persons. And of course, Zelensky will try to use them for next mobilization process in Ukraine. And obviously, these guys are not going to be very, let's say, cruel or something like this. And obviously, the Ukrainians will be able to mobilize additional 500,000 because mobilization will be under control of demobilized soldiers. Furthermore, we got reports that the situation in Ukraine is going to get worse in March, in the summer, but in the early and the second half of the March. So less than 3 weeks, the Ukrainians, according to ABC News, is going to collapse. So we'll see whether the predictions of this informational resource will be confirmed. Furthermore, Vladimir Zelensky, in an interview with Fox News, rejected Trump's idea of the possibility of resolving the conflict around Ukraine in 48 hours. And this is obviously not a very good piece of news about the relations of possible next presidents of states and Zelensky himself. And the situation report from Politica, the West wants to push Ukraine into negotiations with the fixation of on Russian occupied territories as early as this year, according to Politico. But also they add that the Western countries want to make a deal with Russia. The Russians are taking the territories they control, and the rest of Ukraine will go to the European Union. I'm not sure how to say the Western countries are smoking, but I'm not sure that the Russians will allow the Western countries to take around 80% of Ukraine into the European Union. It's impossible. It's impossible according to my understanding of Putin. And that's it for today. Military Summer Channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel. Put your likes to my Patreon and have a good day. Bye bye.